What's going on, everybody? It's the Bulls Show, aka Aidan, and welcome back to another video. Ladies and gentlemen, today is the day where I look at the Chicago Bulls roster and grade the individual performances based on their season and among other aspects as well. This might be a longer video, this might be a relatively short video. I'm not too sure how this is going to go. But basically, I'm going to look at every player, talk about their stats, my personal belief on their season, and give them a grade from obviously F to A+. Those are the ranges that we'll be giving to these players today. But before we get started, please like and subscribe to the Bulls Show, turn notifications on, and let me know in the comments below your thoughts about the Chicago Bulls and their grades for every single one of these players. Again, these might be very different for a lot of people, and I want to give an example by this. For an example, let's just say I give Javonte Green a very high score for this season because he's played power forward a lot of the season. His stats might not be compared to a Zach LaVine or a Vucevic type level, but he might get a higher grade compared to a guy like a Vucevic or a LaVine. Again, I don't know yet, but I'm using that as an example. So in more ways than one, let's just say that happened for the Chicago Bulls. It's going based on what he did this season compared to last season, his importance to the team, stuff like that, how many games he was able to play, the injuries, all of this plays a factor. And it goes based on what they've done from previous years as well. So again, another example, let's say LaVine gets a little bit of a worse score this year because he was a little bit underwhelming and dealing with injuries. That's going based on what he did last year as well. So all of these will have a little bit of, I guess, difference of opinion. It's a very, very, very wide range for discussion. So feel free to play along in the comments below, while also feel free to let me know if you agree or disagree with some of the things I have to say. So how this goes, we'll go through from obviously back to front when you look at the Chicago Bulls roster. So we're going to be starting off with guys like Tony Bradley and stuff like that. And we'll just see where we go from here. If I do forget anybody, I apologize. Again, it's a very big team, but let's just start off. We will start off obviously with Tony Bradley first, ladies and gentlemen. Now, Tony Bradley is a guy that did have a lot of injury concerns, mainly towards his back. His averages was 3 points per game, 3.4 rebounds, and 0.5 assists. Career lows in every single aspect. He didn't shoot a three this season as well. So very, very upsetting. I think Tony Bradley, in my opinion, gets a C- in terms of his production this year. He's had a drop-off, but the drop-off wasn't as massive as maybe other players down on this list. Compared to last season, if you look at last season's stats for Tony Bradley, again, he almost doubled his points with 8.7 points per game, and he had much more rebounds. He basically doubled his points and doubled his rebounds for last year with the OKC Thunder and, of course, Philadelphia as well. So, look, in hindsight, you might give it a little bit more than a C-, but again, the injuries do play a factor. He did play most of the season injured, had back pain as well, and I thought he really carried things and picked things up towards the end of the season. So my personal opinion on Tony Bradley, he does get a C-, considering he was coming into this team as a backup center, and we ended up resulting in us having to get another backup center from the buyout market. I think that's a very easy decision, in all honesty, to give to Tony Bradley. So C- for the first one, ladies and gentlemen, not the best of starts. But then we go to Troy Brown Jr., ladies and gentlemen. Looking at his stats this season, he averaged 4.3 points per game, 3.1 rebounds per game, 1 assist, shooting 41.9% from the field, 35% from the three-point line. So he did have a good increase in terms of his three-point shooting. Compared to last year, though, last year for the Bulls, he averaged 5.5 points per game, and he also averaged, I believe, 3.4 rebounds. So again, not as good as a year this year compared to his previous seasons. But also, I felt like he did have an injury for the Chicago Bulls. He also played for Washington as well, where he had pretty much very similar stats to what he's had for the Chicago Bulls this year. And he played less games for the Bulls last year. So in all fairness, I think for Troy Brown Jr., I would give him an average C score. It's not the worst season from him, but it's far from his best as well. He's one of those guys that, again, is very young, has good potential, could be a very good role player if given the minutes, and he can develop into that role. But in all honesty, this year has not been his best. He's had a couple of hard games, a couple of games where he's been very frustrating to watch. He hasn't been a very good and effective three-point shooter for this team for the most part. So he does have a lot to work on, we can't lie. And with the age that he's at, I would still be willing to give him another chance on this team, multiple chances on his team, to try and develop into that role player. One thing you can't question about Troy Brown Jr., he has very good, very solid work ethic. He's very hardworking, and you can see that every time he steps onto the floor, he's going to give you all he can have on a team like the Chicago Bulls. So that's something that you can't take for granted. But in terms of the statistics, how many game time he actually got this year, I think C is a very good score for Troy Brown Jr. Moving on into Malcolm Hill. Now, I'm not even going to look at Malcolm Hill's stats. Look, he barely played for the Chicago Bulls team. I'm going to give him an average C. Again, not much opportunities to really make an impact. He did have some good games here and there, had some good shooting games here and there. But in all honesty, he was a guy that we got in for the season. He was one of the guys that was given a 10-day contract, stayed on the team, but didn't really have a chance to make an impact. C score for me, in all honesty. Same with Marko Simonovic. I'm also going to give him a C. Again, not enough opportunities. I'm not going to grade Marko Simonovic for his performance in the G League. I feel like that's a little bit unfair if you're comparing to every single other player on the Chicago Bulls team. But with Marko, he's got some garbage time minutes. Didn't really impress, but also didn't really disappoint either. I don't really know what else to say about Marko. I feel like he's one of those types of guys that needs an opportunity next season. But unfortunately, this season has been a lot left to desire for him. And with the age that he's in again, the development that he's been getting in the G League, there's always an opportunity down the line for a guy like Marko Simonovic. Derrick Jones Jr. is next, ladies and gentlemen, and his season averages for the Chicago Bulls, playing 51 games, had 5.6 points per game, 3.3 rebounds, 0.6 assists for Derrick Jones Jr. Again, he did have a couple of injuries, let's say, for the Chicago Bulls. I believe he had a knee injury at one stage, and obviously he had his finger injury, which he's probably still playing through that pain till this day. So very unfortunate for Derrick Jones Jr. His stats were below average compared to Portland, but obviously on a different environment. I think we are a better team than the Portland Trailblazers were last year, but again, I could be wrong on that. Who really knows? But look, I also think this is a very average season for Derrick Jones Jr. Again, the thing about this bench is that you wanted some of the guys to really step up and be leaders off of the bench. And in all honesty, I don't think Derrick Jones Jr. was the guy that we thought coming in. I remember making a video about Derrick Jones Jr. talking about his ability to be a good two-way player, which he has been for the most part, very decent defensively, does foul a little bit too much, and I'd like to see that narrowed down if he was to stay here next season. And run out and transition. I don't feel like we saw much of that whatsoever from Derrick Jones Jr. in all honesty, but his stats show, and again, with the team that he's on, the minutes that he got, I think it's an average C as well for Derrick Jones Jr. Now, that might be relatively good for some people, but I think all these guys getting C's is relatively disappointing. Now, again, these are guys that are not going to make the hugest differences in the world, and they're role players at the end of the day. They play their role well, and that's why they're an average type of player. But realistically, you expected one of these guys to really shine through. Derrick Jones Jr. was a guy that didn't get much of an opportunity in Portland. And he had injuries this year, but he got opportunities with the Chicago Bulls team. I don't think he did tremendously well to take advantage of those opportunities. And that's all a player can really ask for. So we'll see what can happen next year. Granted, there were a couple of times, especially towards the end of the season, he didn't play. And I thought we could have used him in the playoffs a little bit more than what we used him as. But it goes both ways. I think the player has to take advantage of his opportunities, and I also feel like the team needs to trust him a little bit more and put him into more game scenarios. So an average C, in my opinion, for Derrick Jones Jr. Let's move on. We got Matt Thomas. Again, I don't really need to look at Matt Thomas's stats to realize he didn't really get a lot of game time for the Chicago Bulls. Again, you look at this guy, he's a sharpshooter. So looking at his three-point percentage, at least, it was a 38% three-point percentage, which isn't bad at all. He's an average career of 40. It's not too bad from what his season average, what his career average is. But for Matt Thomas, in my opinion, it's a basic C as well. We know what it brings to the table. We know what it can do in terms of, I guess, his limitations and his positives. When he's hot, the guy can truly not miss. When he's cold, he's a liability on defense, and he probably doesn't get many minutes whatsoever. So Matt Thomas is an easy C decision for me based on the games that he's played, based on what he's been able to do offensively and defensively. He's an average player. He's the 15th man. I don't feel like it's necessary to give him an F or anything like that, but I also don't feel like we need to praise him like he's an amazing next level player for the Chicago Bulls. Javonte Green. Let's look at Javonte Green, ladies and gentlemen. In my opinion, he's going to be one of the more interesting players to talk about in terms of his statistics. So, this year for the Chicago Bulls, playing 65 games, he's averaged 7.2 rebounds per game, 7.2 points per game, 4.2 rebounds, 0.9 assists, shooting 52% from the field, 35% from the three-point line. So, look, he's improved in a lot of areas from his career statistics. Looking at last year for the Chicago Bulls, leaps and bounds better than last year for the Chicago Bulls. Last year, he averaged 2.6 points, and he also didn't really average much rebounds or assists whatsoever, let's be honest. So, very, very good season for Javonte Green. Look, again, is he the main guy on this team? Absolutely not. But in my opinion, he's one of the most hard-working players. He's one of those players that will always move off the ball. He's constantly moving. He's a nagging type of player. He will get under people's skins. He has attitude. You like all those things when it comes to Javonte Green. And not to mention, his stats are leaps and bounds better from this season compared to last. He was the majority of the time a starter as the power forward for the Chicago Bulls because we didn't have anybody that could really play that position. That's something we need to improve on next year. But Javonte held that position down when we were majority of the time the first seed in the Eastern Conference. So I feel like it's a very easy choice to go above a C grade for a guy like Javonte Green. I think he deserves it. The playoffs, look, his playoff performance had a lot left to be desired. We have to acknowledge that as well. In my opinion, I'm willing to give Javonte Green a B in terms of this season. Again, compared to last year and this year, he's had a massive step up in production, a massive step up in minutes, and he's become much more trusted by the team. But he wasn't, let's take my breath away type of player. It's in the middle, in my opinion. I think he was a B type of performer for the Chicago Bulls this year. Let me know if you agree or not. Let's move into Coby White. Definitely, in my opinion, a very interesting player. So, this year for Coby White, he averaged 12.7 points per game, 3 rebounds, 2.9 assists, shooting 43% from the field and 38.5% from the three-point line. Let's talk about Coby White, ladies and gentlemen. I've got a lot to say on this type of player. Based on last year to this year, he's had a step down. Last year, he averaged 15.1 points per game, 4.8 assists, and he had, in my opinion, not as good as an efficiency year for Coby White last year, but obviously with a bigger role, I think he did very well in that role. Coby White this year, 12.7 points and 2.9 assists. He's, in my opinion, with Coby White, you got to acknowledge that the players that are coming in his position, again, we've brought multiple guards in for Coby White. Let's be honest. We brought Alex Caruso, we brought Lonzo Ball, we brought Ayo Dosunmu, we brought a bunch of guards that play his position. So I don't think this is the absolute worst Coby White you've seen. But to say that he had a good season is also a very poor thing to say. I thought Coby White's season was not really good for the Chicago Bulls. He played off the bench this year for the majority. You got to put that into perspective as well. But for me, Coby White was a C-. I don't want to give him a D+, a D, or a D-. Look, at the end of the day, you need to have a massive drop-off from last year to this year. He's had to play a lot of different roles. He's had to work really hard to get into this team in the first place. He had a good start to the season. He had a very underwhelming end to the season. And he, along with the rest of the team, had a really mediocre playoff run as well. C- is the way I'm going to go with Coby White. I think his season was below average. It wasn't miles below average because, again, we know his liabilities, and those liabilities still remain true today. He did come back from an injury in the middle of the season. You got to put all these things into perspective with Coby White. But let's be honest, he did not have a great season. So I think I'm going to give him a C-. And we'll see where he can bounce back from in the next year. This is the type of guy, if he's going to come back for the Chicago Bulls next year, he has the capabilities to be our most consistent and our best offensive weapon off of the bench. But we haven't seen it. And he has to prove to us that he can be that type of guy. And until he can be, then we're going to keep on seeing, we're going to see better from Coby White. But if we just keep on seeing this version of Coby White, I think he's too inconsistent for him to have a very good season overall. So we need to start seeing that level of consistency. I don't know if we'll be able to do that. Tristan Thompson. He's come into the Chicago Bulls mid-season, obviously off of a buyout from the Indiana Pacers, and then obviously he came to the Chicago Bulls. We used our biannual exception for him, and look, I've got to be honest. I'm not necessarily positive I saw the best from Tristan Thompson this year either. Now again, you can really tell how the bench has gone for the Chicago Bulls this year. In all honesty, from the beginning of the season, I thought our bench was really good, but at the end of the season, our bench really let us down. But look, he played 57 games this year. He averaged 6 points per game, 5.1 rebounds, shooting 52% from the field. He's played for the Chicago Bulls. He averaged 5.7 points and 4.7 rebounds. So again, relatively low in terms of his production compared to other teams to this team. Now, he's a backup center for the Chicago Bulls, and we had a good team in the first place. He doesn't get a lot of minutes because Vucevic gets a majority of the minutes from the regular season to the NBA playoffs. Vucevic was the guy that we went to. We gave a lot of minutes to him. But we brought in Tristan Thompson for a variety of reasons: to get offensive rebounds, to play hard, to hustle, to have that attitude and that mentality. And he called out some of the players, some of the best players on this team in the NBA playoffs, yet, in my opinion, in the playoffs, he underperformed for the Chicago Bulls big time. Really, really badly, in my opinion. So, I'm willing to give Tristan Thompson a C- as well. Again, I think he has the right attitude. I think he's the type of player you want as a locker room type of guy. He's not going to be, I guess, a guy that's going to play nice. He's going to be brutally honest with you. He's going to tell you what he thinks. He's going to be honest. And sometimes honesty is the best way to get good out of your players. You have to be honest with them. Whether they suck or they play well, you got to be honest. He challenged some of these guys and they had every right to do that. But in order to do that, you had to deliver on the court as well. And I don't think Tristan Thompson did that for us this season. Will he be back next year? At the end of the day, people are still crying out for a backup center. So I don't know if Tristan Thompson will be the answer long term. We'll have to wait and see. My guess is I don't think he's going to stay with the Chicago Bulls. He probably will want a little bit more money. And I don't know if we're willing to do that. Patrick Williams. This year, he averaged 9 points per game, 4.1 rebounds, 0.9 assists, shooting 52.9% from the field and 51% from the three-point line. Again, with Patrick Williams, it's a very similar season to last year. Glimpses, and there's a lot of potential there. He has the skill set. He has the ability. He's not consistent enough. We know the difference between Patrick Williams this year and last year. We saw a couple of good games for Patrick Williams in the NBA playoffs. Obviously, the last game of the season is something to look forward to as well. But he played 17 games this year. In my opinion, that is nowhere near enough time to judge Patrick Williams' season, where he pretty much got going at the end of the season. He basically only played 2 weeks, 3 weeks of the end of the season and the NBA playoffs. Nowhere near enough to judge Patrick Williams. So my average score for him would be a C. I'm hoping good for next year. Again, he shows glimpses, and those glimpses keeps that faith, keeps that hope for the Chicago Bulls players and fans. But we're going to have to see that more consistently next year. And also, I'm really hoping we see a healthy Patrick Williams, because he could be very much a difference maker if we are to see a healthier version of Patrick Williams. Next on the list is Ayo Dosunmu. Now, what's different about Ayo Dosunmu is that he is a rookie for the Chicago Bulls, ladies and gentlemen, so it's hard to base off what I personally would give him compared to maybe other guys, because he's only played 1 year. He's played 77 games, very durable player, probably the most durable on this team outside of DeRozan. Probably him and DeRozan are equal in that aspect. 8.8 points per game, 2.8 rebounds, 3.3 assists, shooting 52% from the field and 37% from the three-point line. Ayo Dosunmu's gradual improvement has been outstanding for the Chicago Bulls. Again, from a guy that got limited minutes, making those corner shots when asked upon, to being a guy that could run out and transition and get easier layups, to being a guy that could be relied on as a two-way guard, to being a guy that could play point guard for the Chicago Bulls, to a guy that we can now put in so many positions, and he will adapt and become accustomed to every position that he's played. Is this the best season from Ayo that we'll see? Absolutely not. He's a rookie. He has so much to work on. He has so much potential. But I thought he had a great rookie year, in all honesty. Considering where he was at the beginning of the season to where he is now, he's had really good improvements overall. I'm going to give Ayo Dosunmu a B. I think he's very similar to a Javonte Green type of player. I think at the end of the day, we can see more from Ayo, and he has shown elements of inconsistency. But for a first-year player, I don't think you can ask much more than that. He made the all-rookie second team, I believe. He made the Rising Stars game as well. There's a lot of accomplishments there for Ayo this year. Fantastic first year, in my opinion, and the sky's the limit for him. He could be that Drew Holiday type of player that many people can link him to, because he has that potential to be that. He has the two-way capabilities. He has the ability to knock down his shots. He has the ability to run point guard. I'm very intrigued to see how the Chicago Bulls can develop him in the long run. Nikola Vucevic. Whew. Again, it's a long list, ladies and gentlemen, but Nikola Vucevic is right up there with the most controversial players for the Chicago Bulls. His season averages this year with 73 games played. Again, another durable player. You got to give him his due there. He's been relatively reliable for playing games. 17.6 points per game, 11 rebounds per game, 3.2 assists per game, shooting 47% from the field and 31% from the three-point line. The stat that really screams out to me is the three-point percentage, 31%. In my opinion, I believe he took the most threes this year for the Chicago Bulls than he has in his whole career, but I could very much be wrong. Look, I can't compare Orlando Vuce to the Chicago Bulls Vuce. One, Orlando was the main guy. Vucevic was the main guy in Orlando, so his stats are obviously going to be much better for the Orlando Magic than it is for the Chicago Bulls. I feel like it's an absolute injustice to put Vucevic's stats compared to Orlando to the Chicago Bulls. And you can't really do much about the Chicago Bulls stats when he was traded here either, just because this team is brand new and he was part of a big three. In my opinion, Vucevic struggled very deeply in trying to adapt to this team. We saw that from the beginning of the season, and I thought we started to slowly see Vucevic change and adapt to this team. But then in the playoffs, we saw the Vucevic we saw at the start of the season, chucking up three-point shots, not the best shot selection, too many of those shots as well. His statistics obviously has gone down. His efficiency has gone down. So that's something you can question, because no matter how good or bad a player has been in the year, the efficiency will most likely tell the story. And his efficiency for both field goal and three-point shooting has fallen down. With Vucevic, it's one of the most hardest, frustrating grades to give, because I honestly don't know how people are going to react to this, because I thought he's had an average season. I thought his season could have been better. Absolutely. I'd love to see Vucevic get that 20-point mark with a big three. I'd love to see all of our big three averaging, 20 points and above. But he was just not that guy to do that. I think I'm going to give Vucevic a D+. I think his defensive woes have been exposed with the Chicago Bulls team. I think he's the main source of our poor pick and roll defense. I think his efficiency has gone down from previous years to this year. I think Vucevic, if you ask him himself, would agree that he's not had his best year. And in all honesty, I still would give Vucevic a chance next year if we can change the whole team around him as well. But let's be honest, he's not had a great year overall. But this is one of his worst years in the NBA in a long, long time, probably since 2017, and he's averaging 17.6 points with 11 boards. That's good for a center's position, in all honesty. But I think for his caliber, what he's been able to do in previous years, which you can't often compare, but his efficiency as well has really let him down. That's why, so far, he's probably got the worst grade overall. It also comes down to coaching as well. At the end of the day, I'm sure Vucevic is not the one saying that he wants to shoot threes all game, but it does come down to coaching. Again, maybe we could do a coaches one later on. Alex Caruso is next, ladies and gentlemen. Unfortunately, due to injuries, he only played half the season for the Chicago Bulls, and he averaged 7.4 points per game, 3.6 rebounds, 4 assists for the Chicago Bulls, shooting 39.8% from the field and shooting 33% from the three-point line. Now, this is a bit of an interesting one as well. Looking at his season compared to last year for the Lakers, an upgrade in almost every single category. He had a much bigger role for the Chicago Bulls, and in my opinion, he took advantage of it very effectively. But you can't look at Alex Caruso without looking at the injuries he sustained. Unfortunately, it's not his fault, but injuries do play a factor in how his season went. So instead of maybe getting an A or an A-, I think he's downgraded to a B, to a potentially a B+, just because his season in total has been filled and riddled with injuries. Not his fault. Again, you can't control what Grayson Allen did to him. You can't control getting a concussion. Obviously, his back soreness. And in my opinion, he stepped up in so many ways for the Chicago Bulls. Leadership, defensive capabilities, his playmaking was very vital on occasion as well. He's a good, very, very good bench player, arguably our sixth man of the year if you're looking at everything. But because of the games played, he only played half the year. I'm going to give Alex Caruso a B+. In my opinion, if he had a fully healthy year and he did this with his defensive capabilities, potentially could have been an All-NBA defender for the Chicago Bulls at one stage if he wasn't injured so constantly, because he was leading the league in steals. We all remember that, don't we? So Again, I thought he had a very good year, very good first year as well, but it could have been so much better if he was just to stay healthy. It's very, very upsetting. Lonzo Ball. You could almost give the exact same thing for Lonzo Ball. It's very unfortunate as well. But looking at his first year for the Chicago Bulls, he averaged 13 points per game, 5.4 rebounds, 5.1 assists, shooting 42.3% from the field, and an outstanding 42.3% from the three-point line. Looking at his year for the Pelicans compared to the Chicago Bulls, obviously playing a bigger role for the Pelicans. He did have better points per game. He obviously had very good efficiency as well from the three-point line, something that we know from Lonzo Ball. He actually had more rebounds on this team, and he's also had a little bit less assists for the Chicago Bulls as well. Now, Lonzo Ball didn't play his role for this team in terms of being that point guard that we wanted him to be. When he was playing on this team, he did have to give the ball up a lot to Zach LaVine, to DeMar DeRozan, and become that set shooter. Now, the positive thing about Lonzo Ball is that no matter how we use him, he's going to be effective. Again, an outstanding 42% from the three-point line. But he also has the ability to run out and transition. He has the ability to pass in transition. He has the ability to be an All-NBA defender in my eyes again. Without the injuries, I think he could have been there. In all honesty, I'm not saying he would have won Defensive Player of the Year, but man, his defense has been outstanding for the Chicago Bulls team. There's no secret that this team went from a top 5 defensive team without Lonzo Ball to obviously with other guys as well. We were 29th at the end of the season. That is a shocking turn of events in terms of defense. So Lonzo Ball, in my opinion, I'm going to give him a little bit higher than a B+. I'm going to give him an A-. Again, that could be very, very big for Lonzo Ball. In my opinion, with Lonzo Ball out, the whole team changed. Our transition play died. Our defense just turned into nothingness. And you could clearly see that we missed our starting point guard. So a point guard should get one of the highest ratings in the NBA in the Chicago Bulls. If you have a point guard that's not doing their job, then it will show with the rest of the team. And I think it did show with Lonzo Ball's absence with the Chicago Bulls. So that's why I give him the high score that he did. But injuries as well has played a factor with Lonzo Ball. At the end of the day, he only played 35 games. He could have easily got an A if he was to stay healthy the whole year. He did his job well. Maybe you can downgrade him to a B+. Maybe you can just downgrade him overall. It's up to you. But for me personally, his absence was absolutely personified. And you could clearly tell that this team's completely different without him in the lineup. I would love to see how this team would have done transition-wise in the playoffs when we needed a guy like Lonzo Ball. It'd be very interesting to see. But at the end of the day, I guess we'll never really know. Looking at Zach LaVine. Zach LaVine, based on this year, 67 games, 24.4 points, 4.6 rebounds, 4.5 assists, shooting 47.6% from the field, 38.9% from the three-point line, an increase in field goal percentage and three-point percentage. That's something surprising to see, but it's no secret he had a worse year this year compared to last year. Last year, he averaged 27.4 points. He also averaged, in terms of rebounds, he averaged 5 rebounds and he had, I think, a little bit more assists this year or last year for the Chicago Bulls. But I got to be honest as well here. I don't think Zach LaVine played that badly compared to last year, considering that DeMar DeRozan is on the team as well. And I thought DeMar DeRozan was outstanding for the Chicago Bulls, and he'll get the grade next. Zach LaVine had a down year overall due to injuries, due to some low IQ shots. We got to be honest. It comes down to everything with Zach LaVine. But in order to have a bad season and still chuck up 24.4 points, 4.5 assists, and 5 rebounds per game, that's fantastic for a guy like Zach LaVine, playing as arguably the second man on the Chicago Bulls team. And next year, with a healthy season, if he does rejoin the Chicago Bulls team, there's nothing more I would love than to make Zach LaVine one of those guys where he is the first option on this team, because this team is going to be his in the long run. If he can't establish himself as that main guy for the Chicago Bulls on a winning team that could potentially go all the way, then at the end of the day, I think he's failed as a player. Personally, that's what I believe. He has to be the number one option going forward. He has to be the guy to control the team and take over the team. This has to be his team. We built this team around him. Granted, DeMar was fantastic. You got Vucevic playing in a different position, in a different role, let's say. Not had a great year, but again, wasn't really terrible either. There are a couple of things you could say about Zach LaVine. I'm going to give Zach LaVine a B. I think Zach LaVine, in terms of injuries, again, he played 67 games this year, which is not bad for all the injuries he sustained. But I think it's clear that the reason why the season was so bad for Zach is that he just wasn't being able to be himself. And it's very frustrating to see, but I don't think he was terrible overall. And DeMar DeRozan. For DeMar, very, very, very good player, DeMar DeRozan. 27.9 points per game, 5.2 rebounds, 4.9 assists, shooting 50% from the field and 35.2% from the three-point line. An increase in almost every single way from his San Antonio Spurs days to the Chicago Bulls. The number one option on this team for the most part, had a historic February season. 2 buzzer beaters in the same, in a back-to-back, first time ever done in history. He had a historic year. And I think it's very easy to give DeMar DeRozan an A. At the end of the day, I don't think anyone deserves an A+. I think to be an A+, you have to be an MVP caliber player and in MVP conversations, which DeMar DeRozan was in for the most part. But in saying that, his end to the season was extremely, extremely disappointing, and that's why he gets an A instead of an A+. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's all I have to say in terms of the grading of this team. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Are you willing to give players a D or a D- or an E or an F or whatever you guys have to say on that situation? Do you guys think that maybe a guy like Lonzo or DeMar deserves an A+? We'll have to figure all that out at another time. But with all that being said, thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe if you're new. Hopefully, if you agree or you disagree, you like the video regardless. It's a very long video, the longest I've made in a very, very long time. But hopefully you guys agree, and hopefully we had a good time playing this type of game. Feel free to play in the comments below as well. With that being said, have a wonderful and safe day. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay tuned for more. Take care.